I think one of the bigger news, I think, BRICS. There's and also there's a lot of geopolitical maneuvers lately, but because we have this, I think, don't know which forum is that in Laos. I think East Asia, or is it
Siam.
ASEAN
It's
plus plus?
the Siam summit. It's the biggest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the East Asia one. Is it the East
Yes,
Asia,
yes,
or
yes,
is it?
yes.
Yeah, I didn't
Singapore
take
belongs
note
to.
because my prime minister was there, and then my foreign minister was there, and then Lavrov was there, and then very funnily Sputnik posted a video of the of my foreign minister, very touchy with Lavrov, introducing him to other people. I was like, it's like then I share it because it's so weird. Because we are supposed to be unfriendly countries, but my foreign minister is like so touchy with Lavrov. and
Well,
there is also news of Cuba wanting to join BRICS, applying for it. There is like a lot of different.
I don't think they want Cuba and BRICS.
Yeah.
No.
There's a lot of stuff. I wasn't monitoring. I saw a lot
It's
of
not the
all these
best
headlines.
ally.
I haven't had a chance to really go through all of them. So I'm also very vague. But all the people who interested in all this all drop off.
It's interesting because the ASEAN summit was always. Sorry, go on.
It's okay, Prata, you can go on because I actually run out of things.
It's very interesting because the ASEAN summit normally are very well publicized. They are very well visited. Normally, it goes the president of the United States, the Chinese president, the Russian president used to come, and this time there is just Michael from the European presidency and Lavrov. These are the highest international invitees, invited persons for that summit, which could also explain why on the end Lavrov is being so well presented. Nevertheless, we saw the visit a few weeks ago of the Malaysian Prime Minister, which officially applied for BRICS. And he was talking in an economical forum with Putin, and he was saying like wonderful things about Russia. I never saw such a kiss ass so well prepared like that prime minister did. So
and then he just shake hands with Blinken just like a few days ago. And then Blinken was like celebrating, how well the good relationship.
That's a true professional diplomat.
Malaysia will play both sides. Okay, Malaysia is like Turkey, so don't expect too much from Malaysia. Malaysia is going to play both sides. No, so just to highlight this because like people, sometimes people not sure because of that, especially if you only you watch a lot of pro-Russian side information, you get confused. You think that Malaysia is going to drift east. It's not true. Malaysia have Western weapons. They collaborate closely with the United States because the biggest threat to Malaysia right now is also China. So it's also China. Malaysia have claiming is one of the claimant states for some of the islands in the South China Sea. So the entire Southeast Asia military is now all militarizing, and they are all buying Western weapons, including Malaysia, especially Indonesia. So everybody's militarizing because of China. So that is the broader thing, but Malaysia is also wanting to to have some safeguard, you see, because they are very distrustful of the West. They're very pro-Palestine. They are very anti-Israel. So Malaysia is playing both sides. They are going all in all the different directions. So them joining BRICS is a good move for them because it is a way to compete with Singapore as well economically, because Singapore don't dare to join BRICS or don't dare to apply for it. We are not even observer yet. So so Malaysia definitely want to move another path so that they can compete with Singapore. So it's not wrong. These are all very natural geopolitical moves. Genevieve.
I wanted to add something about Malaysia, Indonesia, and all these countries who want to stay, I'm going to say, neutral. In the French military industry, we used to sell very few large weapons or expensive weapons to foreign country. And at a point, maybe we will save a lot of demand from back channel about removing the US component from our weapon. And we did that. And suddenly we sold a lot of Rafale, missile, and so on, especially the one with no US component inside. Very strange, isn't it? For instance, I think it's Indonesia decided to buy Rafale fighters from France, but they specifically ask for the one without US component inside, because they don't want any issue with the US State Department. Except for the Australian submarine, of course.
I
Sorry,
think one
of
of
the
the
wound.
things, well, when we're talking now about Malaysia and so on, I just figure out that actually it's very interesting the discussion happening in Indonesia now. They don't know, they have the feeling they need to make a choice, and they are not sure if they can make that choice. So we know that Indonesia was one of the countries that was invited. They wanted really to invite to be part of the first group of entering into BRICS. And the president, Yaboko, what was his name? Yabloko? I forgot, sorry. He refused, and he said publicly that he
Jokowi.
and he said publicly that he refused. He was very flattered, but he refused. And now there is a discussion with the new president, which is a bit more assertive, the new one.
Prabowo.
And he's and there was a surprise declaration from one of the commerce or economy ministers that they could enter the OCDA. It would be very possible that Indonesia could enter the OCDA in a very short time, in less than 1 year, which was very surprising. So the West is also making their counter offers to many of these countries. We know that they tried to do that to Brazil, and the Brazilian president said, "We are open to it, but at the moment we are not focused on it." So it was a polite way to say, "No, thank you." And my other considerations would go to India, and India has been showing very strange signs that they might change their position towards BRICS in a very unconstructive way, by moving completely apart. It would be very destructive for India, but if they believe that would bring them some good, please go on.
Well, India is kind of interesting. Like the history of that country is kind of fascinating because they were always very careful never to side with anyone or any other alliance. They walked the tightrope perfectly. They seemed to play everybody. Now I don't know if this was the genius of the politicians at the time or just an accident of history, but you notice how they were very, very careful never to sign on to one side or the other, and they always seemed to always act in their own best geopolitical interest, and that's what they're doing now. Um, and India I kind of see India as a country that's in the ascendance, and China eventually is going to be in a country in decline because India is not suffering the demographic, implosion that apparently China is. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And India has no illusions of India kind of always just does what a country should do is act in their own best interests, and they've always done that. I respect them for that.
The thing is not about they not doing things for their own interest. Is about considering at this moment which one is the best offer. So it's not being non-aligned. That was the traditional position of India. And you are right. It's also it has a lot to do with historic accidents. Because, for instance, one of the reasons why India become very suspicious about the West is not just their reaction, well, the fact that they had to fight the British to get their independence, but also because when things got really wrong, and they also blamed with Pakistan, and they also the partition of India, and they blamed the British a lot for that. But they also blamed the Americans for later supporting the Pakistanis against India and supplying their weapons and refusing to sell weapons to India. And somehow I think this is the accident in history that made them be very cautious.
Yeah, but
about
but I meant the way they handled it, Prada. Like you notice, because like the United States built a nuclear reactor for Pakistan, and then the Soviets built one for this back in the Soviet Union days. They built one for India, but the Indians were very careful. Like, is that the Soviet Union was trying to expand into India, get them to sign some sort of mutual defense pact, and the Indians were like, nope, we're not doing it. We'll buy your weapons. We'll trade with you, but no, we're not entering into any sort of alliance with you. They were very careful about that.
Yes, and they also had a lot of respect from the Soviets not to push too hard. So this is also a very particular relationship if we understand how the Soviets acted in Africa and many Southeast Asian countries. They were much more pushy in Indonesia, for instance, which made Indonesia change camp immediately, just after a while, but become extremely anti-communist. But in India, the things were the Russians were much more careful about India. So I think it's also one of the reasons why that relationship now with Russia works so well, more or less. And I think the Russians also do everything to support Indian development because they have to build a balance in Asia.
Yeah, well, I also think there's a bit of just the personality of Modi and Putin are kind of similar because they're both very nationalistic, and it seems like they actually get along well. Like just they seem to kind of actually genuinely like each other. So I think there's some of that as well. But it's complicated, right? Because India and China have a lot of problems with each other. But right now, Russia and China are, Russia's forced to have really strong ties with China. They have no other choice. They can't fight the West on their own.
And this relationship is very interesting because that's the reason how BRICS was born. So there was this BRIC forum organized more or less in secret between China, India, and Russia, and it started to work very well. And they started to present themselves and align themselves in terms of political international decision making. And that's when Brazil, in the UN, I think it was 2008, really wanted to be part of it as well. It was an experiment. They accepted. They called the group BRIC. And later, 2 years later, in Russia, they decided to create a real group called BRIC and invited as well. They needed another African country, and they decided to invite South Africa. And so it's the BRICS came with it. So out of this conflict between China and India, and the Russians understanding that this was problematic for them, to have two best friends fighting each other, that the BRICS was born. So if we look at what BRICS is developing, they invited countries that have really problems with each other: Iran and Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Ethiopia. Both, as we see now, Egypt is really creating a situation with Ethiopia that could go very wrong. They just made a kind of an alliance with Somalia and Eritrea against Ethiopia. So but it's interesting. It's a group that it pretends to really solve problems, and I think it's also one of the reasons that so many countries perceive BRICS not as taking a camp, taking a side, but going into another dimension of solving problems. And this is the failure that in the West people do when they look at the BRICS. But there is also a confrontational dimension in BRICS, and I am not going to deny it either.
I think Pakistan is also joining BRICS, right?
Well, they
everybody is joining BRICS.
Yes, Pakistan last year November announced that they are seeking for BRICS membership as well. So, every single pariah state,
Exactly.
having problem with the
because
West.
It's very useful for them.
But look at
if you're part of the BRICS, you have some kind of immunity to sanction from the Western world.
But look at the
most
Shanghai
of the time, those
Cooperation.
BRICS countries are going to continue to trade with you, even with Western sanction.
Yeah, but look at the Shanghai Cooperation organization. The Chinese wanted to put Pakistan in, and the Russians said, then we want India in. And they are working. So I think it's a different approach from the camp mentality that we are seeing in the West, democracy against autocracies. Bullshit, of course, we know that. Yeah. So it's a different dimension. I think this is one of the things that attracts a lot of countries to BRICS, because they feel they perhaps are finding a forum where they will be more able to solve problems, because the UN, as you know, it's completely manipulated nowadays. It's
Yep.
In fairness, it always was, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, you could say that.
I would say that when I look at India's geopolitical situation is a bit. It's like they look strong, but they're actually also very vulnerable. Like they militarily, they seem strong, but actually militarily they're actually very weak, because the only countries that will really fight India will be China, and they can't beat China. Pakistan is weaker than India, generally speaking, because they are smaller countries. So, and they have a lot of internal, separatist
I think
problems.
Pakistan's going to implode. I honestly believe.
Yeah, so Pakistan is a bit risky. They have too much of their own problems. So India's threat is not coming from Pakistan. It's actually from China. And China, they can't beat China, not economically, not militarily. So they need Russia as a friend, and Russia is a very, very close friend with India. And Russia is like it, because India is far away. So they can be very close friends, and they don't feel threatened about each other. So, but the problem with China moving very close to Russia, India also feel very uncomfortable, which means that in the eventuality, if there is a real conflict between India and China, Russia may not help. There is a problem for India as well. So, and India also have this problem with that. I think politically they are too complicated. So they do not have a very, very strong foreign policy kind of thing. It's like they're still very vague. Like no countries will trust India to come and save them in that sense if there's a war.
Yeah.
With exception of maybe Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Maldives. Maybe, because those countries
they're kind of India light kind of though,
yeah,
right?
or Sri Lanka, the countries that are literally next to India, okay, they can still maybe hope for India's help. But anything slightly further away, no one trusts India to come and help. Malaysia will never trust India to come and help. Singapore will never trust India to come and help. So that is also a problem, because the branding of India, in the sense that nobody will trust India to come and help them. And India literally did nothing to help anyone other than, like I said, the neighboring countries' immediate ones. So
foreign policy costs a lot of money. To make this type of influential foreign policy, it costs a lot of money. Well, the US is a big example, but also China. China is giving money everywhere, and this is not cheap.
And they don't give money everywhere. They loan money, and then they know that the person that loaned the money have no money to pay back. So you just have to wave it away.
It's not fair way. They also give a lot of money, and India can't do that. They do have some third world developing programs, but these are tiny things, because India is not a real economical powerhouse that can really afford to.
No, but India's growing. India, see, that's the thing about India, is like they are really growing. Like, I mean, they're like one of the few countries where the middle class is getting bigger. Where you got countries like Europe and the European countries and the United States, so the middle class is shrinking. Right? I mean, it's disappearing in the United States. Especially when we had this ever since
in France too.
Yeah, in France,
in Spain too.
Yeah, right.
Germany too, but I could say it.
So the I don't know what it's like in the other Asian countries, but like India, the middle class that's a sign of a healthy country, is a strong middle class, and that's one of the the people that are doom speakers about the U.S. That's one of the things that they point to, is this vanishing middle class in the United States, and that makes for things very unhealthy, right? Because you just get a bunch of people that are completely dependent on the government for
for people say that India is the fastest growing country in the world, but you guys know they are not growing more than 8. It's 7 point something. In the same development stage of China, they were growing 2 digits. So India,
but there's a little bit of, well, you also take the time period, right, that happened, right, and also China was coming out of going from communism to capitalism or whatever this hybrid kind of thing that they made.
I would say it's a bit different in the sense that when China was growing, opening up and growing, there is no competition. There's no like big competition. If you tell India to grow, hyper grow now, China is a super huge competition which they cannot beat. So so they can't possibly grow at the level of what China did, because China is now so powerful economically. Like if you want to build a business right now, you want to get cheap goods to design your own stuff and produce them at cheap rates, you got to go to China. Alibaba will be the choice naturally. Like everyone does the same because it's so cheap. Although it makes zero sense. How can it be so cheap? It doesn't matter, because it's so cheap. So people will just continue to feed the foreign currency to foreign exchange to China because it's just so cheap. How China hacked this game and how they will survive this, that is not our problem, you see. But it will not last forever as well. So, but the thing is, India have its own problem because internally they're just too complicated and they're just too messy. The bottom class is too huge. And there is a lot of infrastructure problems, and every state is also different because they are also a federation. So every state have totally different level of development as well. You can go to one state is super clean and very well organized, then you go to another one is just like a slum. So that's also a problem. When we look at India,
it's kind of like the United States. What it sounds like places in the United States.
I think it's more extreme. I think India is way more.
Like any country, like every country has this inequality, so it's normal. But the thing is that we have to take into attention that the industrialization of China or the modernization of China industry was possible because China was an autocracy and a dictatorship. They could decide how many engineers they need, how many doctors, how many everything. And they produce people to work in those specialities they wanted to organize. And we know the violence, forcing people to leave the countryside to cities and so on, obliging them to live and they still do, to workers to live in horrible conditions and so on and so on. India doesn't have that because it's an open society, is a democracy, and people study stuff that it's useless, but they perceive it as good. So there are huge amounts of useful lawyers. The state spends a lot of money creating lawyers. They don't need any more lawyers, but they keep forming lawyers every year in big quantities because India is a democracy. The people have the free will. And when I'm saying, yes, India has a lot of potential, like many countries around the world, but we can't expect them to come any near to the Chinese because their development, which is much more way behind the China, and is coming now to those moments when China was exploding. But that moment in China was growing like 2 digits, and India growing a lot. It's just growing 8%. So I don't see them bringing. And I was watching a very interesting discussion from an Indian university when they were complaining about this stuff, and they were saying, when we develop the material, yes, and we present it to the market, the Chinese and we later are already developing a product that is superior. So the thing is that if India really believes it will substitute China, which is a political will, and that's a big mistake. If they believe that their business plan will be based on doing a second China, they are lost. They won't be able to compete. And now coming back,
I wasn't trying to.
I'm sorry.
India was trying to replace China in any way. I was just saying that India is on the ascendance.
But the political will in India is to create a second China. They are crazy. They believe that if they slam China enough, Western countries will invest in India instead of investing in China. And this is stupid. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the quality control. Products produced in India are much more probable to not to work correctly than if they do in other places. In Southeast Asia, it doesn't need to be China. I'm not even talking about China. So quality control in India is horrible. Infrastructure is very bad. Political will is very complicated. It's a very bureaucratic country. It has a lot of red tape. And secondly, there is a lot of hand force, but there is not a lot of specialized working force for all necessities. They have a lot of people in computing, mathematics, and lawyers, but then there are a lot of things missing, where they have a population that is actually basically now how you can, they can't read us or write. We have to take that into consideration. So I hope the Indians wake up one day and understand that they need to find another business plan that works for them, not to try to beat China, but to find. And I also was today listened to a political science, an Indian political science, where he was saying that actually there is nothing concrete that puts China against India. Quite the opposite. We should work together because they have technology that they can transfer to us. So complaining about the actual position of the Indian politicians to be extremely xenophobic. Yeah, but it's how it works. Wait, there is a big news. The big University of Moscow announced the creation of a supercomputer, which is probably the second or the third fastest supercomputer in the world. And it was known that the components were bought for 2 billion euros, for 2 million euro, for $2 million in AliExpress.
Okay.
Yes. The same
the spare parts,
computer,
right? It's not the chips, right? It's the
chips
parts.
with itself. There's everything is on
Everything.
sale on Alibaba. You can buy it, everything there.
So they bought the supercomputer from China essentially.
No. They bought the
components
parts and they
They bought
assembled it.
Assembled it, they think it was fit, and they got the supercomputer.
And then they tune it.
Yes,
and they create the software. I think the software is very important here.
Yes, of course, but the same computer in terms of hardware would cost in the United States $2 billion. So, well, we it's an anecdotal thing about
And I think you need a nuclear power plant to just make sure everything is running.
Again?
I think you need a nuclear power plant just to make sure there is enough power for the things.
I think the Russians have enough energy, don't worry. They have the biggest per capita consume of energy in the world. I don't think they have.
They have no issue to cool everything in Russia.
Yeah.
They have no issue to cool everything in Russia. For data centers, the cooling is a very important issue. If you create a data center in St. Petersburg, it's going to be very easy to cool it for most of the years, I think.
They just build the entire server.
Texas is going to be way more complicated.
Just build the server base in the Arctic, that is theirs anyway. So Shadow V, continue.
Yes, I wanted to add something about India, about the quality control of the Indian industry. I think it was 10 years ago, France sold to India a lot of Rafale aircraft fighters. Basically, the deal was we build 20 in France and 100 in India. So it's not going to be very expensive because basically we give India everything. The technology, the aircraft, the factory, everything. But after a few months, they have to rewrite the deal. Because in India, they were not able to have the quality control to just to build together the Rafale with the part coming from France. That means that they rewrite the deal, and instead of 100 built in India, they had just bought, I think it was 50 or 60 built in France. And the Indian army asked to change the deal. Not the French government, the Indian army. Because they were receiving airplanes that was not working, basically. And they needed this airplane against China, Pakistan, and everybody else. So they have a huge issue, so they have to lower the number of aircraft, basically because their own industry was just not good enough.
I think a lot of deals with India, like especially from Russia, is always like there's some technology transfer, like always, and it's always built in India. Like they have to build a supply chain in India. Like that's often the deal. And
Yeah.
and something I noticed.
Yeah, and I would
wanted to
say
add a
this
second
is
point.
interesting for the Russians as well, because they don't have the industrial capacity for these huge orders. So there is, for instance, a very interesting deal, which is to build 400 carriage from Russian technology, and they are going to build it in China. In India. And the reason for it is not because the Indians can do it better. It's just because they don't have the workforce in Russia to build suddenly 400 carriage in such a short time. But the steel will have to come from Russia. Interestingly, that they can do, but the assemblage, all that thing, that it needs to come from India because they don't have the workforce for that. Actually, an old problem in Russia.
I wanted to add something about India that very few people understand. India is some kind of federation. Every province have a lot of internal power. And it's even more than that. Because every province was, a few centuries ago, an independent kingdom with a millennial history. Each Indian kingdom have an history who could, basically they invented the writing with the Sanskrit. So they have a history that go way, way in the past.
Yeah.
So
But
imagine the United States, where every state in USA has a 3 millennial history of fighting each other, of course.
But
And
Shadovi, don't
that's
forget
a part
the
of
Indians.
history of India.
But Shadovi, sorry for cutting you, but don't forget that they all consider part of the same civilization. And they always have been considered themselves part of that civilization. It's
Yes,
like
in
a
USA too.
country that doesn't exist in our understanding of Western existence as a country. They all understand that they belong, even when they converted to Muslim, like the elites were all Muslims, they still saw themselves all belonging together to that civilization, and they were alliance between themselves from the south to the north, from the east to the. They were never united in a country, never in history, but they all belonged to somewhere together, and they communicated somewhere together. And the Mongols in the north, when the Portuguese arrived there, they didn't have any capacity of control all these kingdoms, but they were respected as a higher voice. Goy.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say about touching on Shadowy's point that, yeah, like for those who don't know, every state in the United States has its own separate constitution. You know, they all have their own. They have their own governor, and they all have, and each state has its own 3 branches of government. They have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial. So so a lot of the problems people are talking about India, you could kind of say, well, the United States has all those same issues, right? And there's a very big difference between the mindset of, let's say, someone that lives in, let's say, California, and someone that lives in, let's say, Idaho. Okay, these might as well be different countries in every way you can possibly imagine. Everything from demographics to just religions to, in Idaho, you can walk around with a gun on your hip and walk into a 7-Eleven or a Starbucks, and it's totally legal. You do that in California, they call a SWAT team. So that's how different things are in the United States. So there are these huge differences, yet the United States is the most powerful country in the world. I'm not saying it's going to stay that way. I'm just saying right now it is still.